Hey, welcome back to Everyday Economics. This is the podcast in which you'll learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug. I'm the CEO of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network, and you can check out all of our terrific podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make a tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Friday, November 22nd, and I am joined, as always, by my dear friend and colleague and partner in Everyday Economics, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD economist and a smart dude. And you know how I know you're smart? That gray beard. I mean, it's just like it's just like wisdom is just coming out of you like constantly. And you between shows today, you told me that you're going to let that grow at least until Christmas.
Yeah. Why not?
Wow, I think it's cool.
I'm getting compliments, so why not keep it around?
Look, take them as they come, as many as you can get. We wanted to do a show, and this is somewhat evergreen topic, on the unintended consequences of government meddling in business activity. I just got off of an airplane, and I flew into O'Hare today from Newark, New Jersey.
Yeah,
and walked right by the baggage carousel at O'Hare Airport for Spirit Airlines on the way to get my bags from the good people at American, who were only an hour and 40 minutes late for me today. I guess the unintended consequences of traveling, but we're going to talk about the unintended consequences of meddling. But you raised that as an example. I mean, Spirit within the past, I think it's maybe been 2 or 3 weeks now, that they've announced that they are going to have to seek bankruptcy protection in the American airline industry. The U.S. airline industry, just to make it clear. It feels like at one point or another in the last 20 years, every single airline that is still flying today has had to file for some sort of bankruptcy protection or is completely reorganized. And the subject at hand is the federal government got in the way of Spirit Airlines merging. And jog my memory. Who was Spirit trying to merge with? It was another kind carrier.
They tried with Frontier and then
with Frontier, and then with JetBlue.
Yeah, that's right.
And JetBlue has, it seems like over the last 5 or 10 years, has tried to find a partner. Really interesting business plan for JetBlue. I mean, to get JetBlue off the ground, where they took all these open gates and some of these smaller airports in metropolitan areas or airports adjacent to larger metropolitan areas to kind of get the business up and going and to be a low cost, high quality competitor, right?
Yeah.
Spirit, I wouldn't say that that's been their business model. Spirit is kind of has a little bit of People's Express for the older folks that are watching or listening to Everyday Economics, that they are, not to say low quality, but they try to compete on price. The federal government said no to the intended merger between Spirit and Frontier. And so, here we are. Spirit's not in a great spot.
Yeah. And again, I mean, this whole story I thought it was really fascinating. The good news is Spirit Airlines will continue to operate and hopefully exit bankruptcy next year. But the risk, right? And this was all caused by a number of factors, but essentially preventing this merger, I think, was could have played an important role. I think that sometimes government officials don't really consider the unintended consequences of some of their actions, right? So just going after this airline at a time where the airline is actually would potentially need the merger in order to be able to compete against some of the bigger airlines, which, by the way, would have been good for consumers, could have backfired with
Mm-hmm.
the airline, an airline that could potentially um, go into bankruptcy and then eventually, and very potentially, right, also just stop operating altogether, right?
Right. Right.
Which would ultimately result in fewer seats for consumers, less competition in the aviation industry,
Yes.
and ultimately higher prices. And so I think it's very, very important that as regulators think about these problems of competition and in various industries, that they're very careful to look at the full picture and the unintended consequences of those actions.
So let me just fact check this, because Spirit has been actively engaged in trying to make a merger happen for a while, right? So earlier this year, it was regulators that got in the way of a JetBlue
Spirit.
Spirit merger. In more recent days, like literally within the last month, Spirit has been trying to make something happen with Frontier. But in theory, they would be dealing with the same obstacles as part of any kind of a merger because of the regulation that exists around airlines in the United States. Yeah. So I mean, so your Spirit. So what do? You just kind of keep gritting it out until you can find a way to, one, solvency, or two, a deal that the federal government thinks is okay.
Well, I don't know. I am not a regulator. I can just tell you that when they make these decisions, when they consider, breaking up potential monopolies or preventing companies from merging, they should really consider the unintended consequences. Right?
Yeah.
You have on the good side, monopolies can be very, very bad because ultimately consumers face, right, one supplier, and basically that one supplier could make things somewhat expensive for consumers. At the same time, and at the same time, right, the quality of the stuff that we get could actually diminish. At the same time, in the labor market, you could have basically one massive employer and employees struggling to having very little negotiating or bargaining power, and so that's a problem, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to acknowledge that, but at the same time, we have to be very careful that in our attempts, in our efforts to kind of level the playing field, we don't get in our own way, And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
And we don't have many choices when it comes right down to it, with airlines. I mean, really. I mean, so, there are only 18 airlines in the United States that in 2023 carried more than 4 million passengers. And
yeah,
when you look at the list, American was number one, Delta was number two, Southwest was number three, and these are total passengers carried, right?
yeah,
United was number four. There's a massive drop off to number five, where it goes to Air Canada, Alaska. Spirit, who we've been talking about quite a bit, is number seven. JetBlue is number eight, and then you get into some airlines that I think a lot of Americans maybe have never even heard of, and certainly haven't ever traveled on, like Volaris, which is based in Mexico. Frontier is number 10. Then you get down to WestJet, and then below that line, I mean, the only airlines that people who would like have any vague understanding of the airline industry, Allegiant Airlines is on there. Hawaiian Airlines is on that list, and Sun Country is number 18. And I think Sun Country is mostly, I think it's mostly regional travel. So yeah, I mean, it's not as if we have the kind of options that we used to have. I mean, in my adulthood, and not even as a business traveler, but just as a traveler in general. I mean, U.S. Air gone, Continental gone.
mhm,
I'm trying to think. Well, certainly some of the like the I referenced People's Express earlier. That once upon a time was a super low cost carrier. It was literally like cattle car type service. Gone. It is expensive to operate an airline. right? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of expense there, and the margins apparently must be incredibly tight to make it happen. Where it comes back to us as Americans is really in a lack of choice. I mean, you like, and I'm sure that it's this way for you. You travel quite a bit also.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I look at my options, it's usually American, which I've been flying on pretty faithfully for 15 years. Delta, and United. I mean, Southwest doesn't even really just because of where I live. In the part of Chicago where I am, trying to like access the entirety of Southwest's routes is challenging because I mean, Midway is their primary hub, and that is an hour and 35 minutes away from where I am, and it's not the best drive in the world. Certainly during rush hours coming or going. So, I mean, in your opinion, I guess specific to regulation, I mean, what should be done, in the American airline industry? I mean, just in pure economic terms, what could be done? Should it be total free market and no subsidies from the federal government, no bailouts, no nothing? Figure it out, make it work. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, the entry cost is so high, right? So if you were to say, hey, we're not going to support airlines, then it's going to be very, very difficult to keep that industry competitive. I mean, you're already seeing what airlines are having to do. Their seats are getting smaller. The meals are going away. Right, and so it's a very difficult industry to be in to start with, and potentially part of the problem is what airlines have to pay at various airports,
Mm-hmm.
and so right, maybe the way we tax uh, some of this activity will be a one way to support to help airlines going forward. But yeah, I mean it's a very difficult industry to be in, and I don't know what level of government intervention or support is necessary
Right.
when compared to perhaps making it easier, less, taxing the activity a lot less than it is taxed right now.
Mm-hmm.
I know, for example, that it's very costly depending on the airport. So I don't know if you've ever tried to travel across the country, or across the country, or maybe even internationally. But
Yep.
different zones will tax you. They'll be
Oh
surcharged
yeah.
on your
Takeoff
tickets
and landing taxes and
that are
yeah.
that are right that will raise your ticket price by a lot. And so maybe and of course those again, it's passed on to consumers, but there's only so much you can pass on to consumers, right? And so I think you have to be um, we have to be very careful. I think government has to be careful as to how to proceed with an industry that is so important. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the bulk of travel is business travel, right? And so it's not, we need the airlines. We need to get around. It's part of why we're productive. And so yeah, that's kind of my take on that. I'm not here to look into one policy or another. And of
No,
course,
certainly not.
I would have to spend some time to research
Mr.
the various
Mr.
policies.
Switzerland is gonna stay out of that. And I have no qualm with that. And we can call it to an end. It was a good conversation, just around something that consumers are dealing with. I mean, why do you care if Spirit merges with Frontier or JetBlue or some other airlines? Well, I mean, it might preserve both of those airlines, and that
It
comes
might,
back.
it might, exactly. And it might help them. I mean, at least that's their argument. Their argument is it might help them compete with other airlines,
Right.
larger airlines like
That's right.
United and Delta, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. We'll see if those airlines manage to stick around.
Right.
in the case of Spirit, I think we're hopeful they're going to continue operating through Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they will.
And so, but we'll see what happens next.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. As always, Dr. Orphe. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high-quality podcasts at americastalking.com.